Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our final segment, we did get a comment right before the break from my man Andre. Jamar is going off this week. He's going to absolutely destroy the Commanders. And I completely agree with you. Yes, that game against the Giants, it was the Giants though. The Commanders secondary did look decent, but against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who does have one of the better 1-2 receiving cores in the league, they got torn apart. So I completely agree with that sentiment. And I especially think that all of these secondary weapons that the Bengals could have, like a guy like Andre Yoshevas, who stepped up in that game against Kansas City, will also wreak havoc. So I'm not as familiar with the Commanders secondary as some of the guys who I'll mention on this list in terms of the cornerback position, but I do believe that Jamar Chase is going to get right, and the Bengals will eventually get right, and I'm not worried about this team. In fact, I'm very relaxed. Yes, they're going to have tough stretches, but I feel like Joe Burrow can take them through it. They really should have won that game against the Chiefs. I'm still mad about that pass interference penalty. If you're not a Chiefs fan, you know exactly what I mean. But at the end of the day, this team is one of the more well-rounded, undeserving, for that matter, 0-2 teams. So, I agree with that same Andre, but let's look at some other receivers and cornerbacks in terms of their matchups for this weekend. Starting off with one that's not happening this weekend, but tomorrow night. That's the wrong graphic again. Garrett Wilson and Christian Gonzalez. Sorry for the misspelling of Gonzalez's last name in advance, but this matchup's really exciting, right? Because we've seen kind of the Jekyll and Hyde performances of Christian Gonzalez throughout the season. Against Jamar Chase, actually, he did kind of lock him down. Jamar only had 62 yards on 6 catches in that game. Then against DK Metcalf, not to toot his horn, as a Seattle Seahawks fan, he did have a big game, had 14 catches, I believe, 131 yards, and that one long touchdown, albeit in a situation where there was kind of a broken play and kind of lost him in coverage a little bit. But I think that Garrett Wilson is an interesting proposition because of the fact that they're still gelling, both him and Aaron Rodgers, in terms of getting the trust of each other. Garrett Wilson trying to get the football more often in this offense, while with Aaron Rodgers having his two buddies there, in Lazard and Mike Williams. So it's a day-to-day thing. It's a week-to-week thing with this matchup. I just wanted to pinpoint because we've seen Jekyll and Hyde performances from both these players to start off the season. And I think the ultimate winner of this battle will have to come down to Aaron Rodgers' QB play, and if he's comfortable enough to start trusting Garrett Wilson more. That being said, I do want to see still some diversity in terms of the Jets' offense, so it could project to be one of those matchups that kind of is underwhelming. But Garrett Wilson, I'm hoping he has a big day. Still in my fantasy team. This game will probably determine whether I cut him or not. Just joking about that because I still have high hope for him. But it's going to be a good one. Coming up next, though, on my list is a matchup that I believe is not going to happen. Justin Jefferson and Derek Stingley versus Derek Stingley and Kamari Lassiter. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. It could happen. As Hunter18 says, should I be worried about Laporta? In terms of the matchup, I don't know whether or not you're alluding to another injury, because I don't necessarily know if Laporta is injured, actually. But I don't think you should be worried about Laporta in the slightest. I think that offense is going to find its footing. Jared Goff's in one of those weird funks where he's kind of reverted back to his start as a Ram in his rookie season when he did not play very well. But I think he'll find his footing. And Laporta is one of his favorite targets as well. He's going to be very effective in the red zone later in the year. And in these coming weeks, as their games get a little bit tougher, they have two NFC West opponents with a lot of friskiness to them in Arizona and Seattle. So it's going to be interesting to see how Jared Goff handles that. But just know that the same Laporta still has a lot of upside and is still one of my favorite young tight ends in the league. And perhaps in the top tier of tight ends who are more youthful in nature, in my humble opinion. So I don't think you should worry or press the panic button on Laporta just yet. Let's talk about the matchup that didn't happen, bear with me here. This graphic was made before, the news of all these injuries. But let's actually look at the Vikings receivers against the Texans secondary just in general, because this could be an interesting game. Because you don't have any of your top three guys. You don't have Justin Jefferson, you don't have Jordan Addison, and you don't have TJ Hawkinson. What you do have is a nice kind of supplementary receiving room after the fact with Brandon Powell, who I love as a red zone threat, and Jalen Naylor, who can still extend the field some and really has nice top-end speed, get yards after the catch. So it's going to be a weird game, right? Because this is the Sam Darnold's first game without, Justin Jefferson. So it's going to be interesting to see how he distributes the wealth in that offense. But in terms of the Texans secondary, they really haven't been tested to this point. Yes, with the Indianapolis Colts game, they had the 2 long touchdowns given up. And the Bears game, their front 7 just took over, so we didn't necessarily see many throws by Caleb that threatened them. So this game is really going to be indicative of Sam Darnold's play rather than the Texans secondary. So if you did take a chance on waivers on a wide receiver for the Vikings, this game is going to be all about whether or not Sam Darnold's play can elevate them. But it sucks that Justin Jefferson can't be a part of that matchup either, because it would have been an interesting case to study. Next one. This one got a little bit less interesting, but it could still work out to be a situation where there are a couple deep shots for the Miami offense. Tyreek Hill versus Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon. Now, this one could come down to more of how Mike McDaniel operates this offense. I think Skylar Thompson, don't quote me on this, will ultimately get the start. And if he does, it's going to be a lot of dink and dunk in my opinion. They did sign Tyler Huntley to their practice squad. And I think he will have a little bit more upside in this offense if he's given the keys to the car in this game. But at the end of the day, this matchup is definitely lessened. I think that you're going to see a lot of Tyreek Hill coming deep as another question from Hunter 18. Keep them coming, my man. Start Richardson or Carr until Richardson finds his footing. Interesting question here. I think that both of these guys have very similar traits, even in their drastic age differences, where they both rely on their deep ball a lot. But right now, Carr's deep ball is translating to a weapon that the Saints can utilize to more better effect, whereas Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson really haven't found the right combination to really get going. So you're right that Richardson is going to struggle a little bit to find his footing. I think that I want to see more out of the Saints offense, but at this point in time, it's just that Derek Carr has been the better QB in my humble opinion, and he has the better offensive weapons should opposing defenses start to figure them out. So for the time being, you can start Carr. I hope that Anthony Richardson does get better. He has a lot of good traits that he can utilize to the best of his abilities later on in the season. But as of this current moment, you're right in acknowledging the fact that Derek Carr can be a high-end starter based off of the 2 games that he's played already. Let's look at, again, this matchup really made less interesting because if Tua was in there, you had to have thought that there would have been a couple deep shots to test the Seattle's corners, especially in the new McDonald era, with him incorporating his new ideas and these young players trying to learn it. But right now, I think Reek Woolen and Devon Witherspoon just gain a huge advantage in the fact that Tua isn't playing. But it could be interesting if Tyler Huntley plays, because as he's more ambitious, I believe, than Skylar Thompson. But it's going to come down to, how Mike McDaniel handles it. The last one's another one that I did not foresee happening with Cooper Kupp, which I very swore. But another, again, the Minnesota Vikings wide receiver room, the Los Angeles Rams wide receiver room, is one where you get a lot of depth outside of it as well. I think that in that case, though, you also are concerned about Matthew Stafford, whether or not, a lot of pressure starts falling on him. They have a lot of offensive line issues, I think Steve Alala is going to come back at some point in the season. Jonah Jackson, though, is expected to miss an extended period of time. Joe Noteboom as well. So that is more concerning than the loss of wide receivers. But they still have depth at the position. Tutu Atwell is interesting. I believe they still have Demarcus Robinson, another guy who can extend the field. Colby Park's an interesting tight end. Knowing him from his time at Seattle, he can have a couple of nice games for you. But yeah, it just sucks that both Jefferson and Kupp were guys who I thought were going to have breakout games this week in high-profile matchups, and it just falls that they're injured. But there are still a lot of other options as well that I didn't put in this graphic and really realized as recently as today that they can have big matchups. So let's talk about those guys outside of what I have on my screen. Rashee Rice. Let's talk about Rashee Rice. I think that against A.J. Terrell and Mike Hughes in that Falcons secondary that really is performing under the facade, I guess, is the right word for it. I don't necessarily think they were impressive against Philly. I just think that in the red zone, they kind of shored up a little bit more than I thought they would. But overall, they didn't really stand out to me in terms of what they did. I think the front seven for Falcons is what stood out to me the most on the defensive side of the football for them. But this matchup can really prove that Rashee Rice warrants a look in deeper leagues, maybe as a wide receiver 2 or a flex option. Because right now, he is projecting to be a high-end wide receiver 1 in Kansas City. And Patrick Mahomes is starting to trust him more and more, not just over the middle, but you saw the deep shot in that game against Cincy. I think that Rashee Rice is getting more mature in his route tree. And what with, Travis Kelce not finding his footing, Xavier Worthy, he's going to get more touches, but he's still finding his way in this offense. And just the approach of Andy Reid of rotating his receivers in and out, I think that, Rashee Rice is going to have a lot more opportunities to prove himself and cement himself as a wide receiver 1. And why not do it against one of still the more underrated secondaries in the league, even though they haven't really shown it as of yet. And then Mike Evans against Pat Surtain II, another interesting matchup because the Broncos defense really, again, another defense that hasn't looked impressive on paper. They've held certain teams to certain point totals, but at the end of the day, Pat Surtain is still the best corner in the league, in my opinion. One of the best, the best player on the Broncos by far. Matching up against Mike Evans, the most experienced, most consistent receiver in the league. I think that is going to be an interesting matchup that Baker Mayfield's going to want to exploit. Expect this matchup to only happen about 80% of the time in the game, as Mike Evans can align anywhere. He aligns in the slot more often than not. So they're going to move Mike Evans around a lot, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but look out for Pat Surtain II to try and follow him as best as possible. But those are just a few of the receivers that I think will have interesting games against certain cornerbacks who I'm really looking at to help their defenses. But let me know what you think in the comments. But that'll just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your lovely comments. Keep them coming from the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features on YouTube. Also, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. It's a huge support to me, my fellow podcasters, and the network as a whole. But other than that, we'll be right back here on the GSMC Sports Network, same time as always, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, with another great show. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm out.